Hey guys, welcome back to the channel again. Thanks for joining me on this one. This one's going to be pretty intense. So we're going to completely rebuild the front suspensions on this Lexus, including the brakes. Of course, we're going to replace the shocks with the Tein Street bases, just like we did in the rear. So everything's going to be done here, a complete overhaul. I just want to give you a list of tools that you might not have in your toolbox if you're going to try to do this. The reason being is, you know, some of these are a little bit larger. You know, we got a 19mm and a 17mm that you might not have, that you might want to think about getting before doing this. So also I have a inner tie rod, I guess, removal tool and installer. It makes the job a whole lot easier. There's other ways of actually doing it, but this is the easiest way. So we have everything already set up here. We've got our new brake calipers and equipment, all new hardware, every suspension piece that we're going to possibly need here. One thing you're going to need too is a torque wrench. We're going to pay close attention to the torque specifications on this, because this is all about safety. And if you're going to do this, I don't want you getting on the highway and hitting the wall. So we're going to pay attention to our torque specifications here. So you need a torque wrench that can at least do 250 pounds. And of course, you're going to need your Loctites. You're going to need your blue and red. Very important. So it's going to make a whole lot more sense once we start putting the new suspension together, as into why you need these things and why we're going to follow the specifications for torquing everything down. So before we get started here, I wanted to point something out. So right up in here is what you want to pay attention to. This is your alignment bolt here. That sets your camber. Hopefully the camera picks up here. It's right there. You can see I cleaned it off already. It's got a little slot, a little hole in the middle there. I would mark my position there if I were you. So when we install this, we kind of put it back in the same spot before we take it over to the alignment shop. Okay, so another thing to do before getting started is there's this lower brace down here. It's your subframe brace. It's kind of like an A shaped right up in here. You want to loosen the bolts in the middle. Matter of fact, since this car is perfectly jacked up levelly in the front, so you can tell on the other side there's a jack over there. So you want to take this brace off. It's going to help you in the install on this lower control arm here. So make sure to do that first, and then we can get started. What I do here is remove the brake caliper off of here first, and then we'll get the bracket off, and then remove the rotor. Be our first step. We're going to try to clean everything up here. Of course, we're going to replace all this hardware here, lines and everything. You can tell someone installed this line incorrectly. It should not twist like this, so just in case you guys aren't doing that. It only should have one twist in it, not two. The reason being is you can probably tell back here, hopefully, it's been rubbing against this metal, so it was just a matter of time that this hose is going to be eating up. So take this off. And these are 14s, just so you know. These two bolts back here that are holding on the bracket are 17. They should be pretty tight, so you might need some type of breaker bar. Alright, so next I'm going to start doing is removing all the cotter pins and off the tie rod end here. just kind of get prepared to get it for removal. And there's another one up here. Alright, so now we're going to take this crown nut off the tie rod end. I'm not going to completely remove it. I want to keep it loose because we still got to come back here and actually disconnect it from here as well. So we want to get it, make sure that we have something to hold on to. So now I'm just going to break it loose from the steering knuckle here. Just like so. And I'm going to go ahead and just leave it on there just like that, with the nut still on it. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that this was slightly loose, so when I pop this down, I should be able to actually screw this thing out. But I'm not going to screw it out yet. I'm just going to let it hang down for now. Because the thing is, as soon as we get the boot off back here, it's going to expose the end. And what I'm talking about here is this is what's on that side there. So I need to get a quick measurement with the measuring tape from this point here onto the center of the tie rod end here, the stud. So I need to get that measurement so when I install this new one, I have a good go by to see what the car was previously set at. That way it's somewhat aligned until I get to alignment shop and they align it correctly for me. Alright, so the next piece we want to remove is this whole piece here. This goes up to the upper control arm here, up that way, and then this lower control ball joint here. So it's going to be kind of hard to see here in the camera, but there's two bolts that are holding in from the bottom side going up this way. And so I bring the new piece here to kind of show you that this is actually sitting like this in here. And so there's two bolts that are holding it onto here, and they're kind of pinned. So there's two bolts, they're 17 millimeter. We're going to remove those two. Alright, so once we got those two bolts removed, it's time to remove this crown nut here on the top of the control arm. This one is a 17 millimeter as well. Alright, the next thing is to remove this bracket here. This is to our sensor. And then there's one more 10 millimeter bolt down here. I'm not sure you can see on camera, it's right here. This is to the sensor. And then gently wiggle the sensor out, just like so. Go ahead and inspect it at this point, make sure everything's fine. I'm going to go ahead and put this out of the way so we don't damage that sensor at all. Alright, so now I'm going to take apart the sway bar linkage here, this short little small section. This side I believe, is a 14 millimeter. This one is a 17 millimeter. This is also part of the bracket that's going to come off this lower control arm as well. So make sure not to lose that piece. Alright, once we got the nuts off of these, the sway bar end link here, we're going to go ahead and take off this bolt that's holding in the shock. This is 17 millimeter as well. Alright, so we're on top of the engine here, and we're going to remove these three nuts here on top that are holding up the strut. These are 12 millimeter. Alright, so now we can carefully move the strut out. Alright, so with the strut out of place, you should be able to remove this link for your sway bar. Do that by just kind of wiggling it out, I guess. Get that piece out, and this side should just slide right out. Next thing we got to do is we're going to remove this bracket right here that's holding the level sensor on the front suspension here. Alright, so what I'm going to do real quick is, you remember at the beginning of the video I told you need some type of pry bar? Well, this is the purpose of it. If you're going to only replace one of these control arms, these lower control arms, if it happen to be this one or this one here, these two bolts, there's two big giant bolts here at the bottom. Those are the 19 millimeter. This is where you're going to need that pry bar, okay? So I'm just going to show you real quick. Of course, we're going to replace all this in this video, but you know, all these are really tight. So a pry bar makes quick work of these. Believe me, regular tool will give you nightmares trying to do that. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. It's not necessary to remove it on this step that we're doing here, but that was just in case if you're not doing it all, okay? And that's where, when we spec this down to torque specifications, it's very important to get these right. Alright, so the next step is to lower the front and rear lower control arms here. So we got this bolt here, that's the 19 millimeter, and we have a bolt that comes right through on top of here. Sorry for the middle finger. That way, that's a 17. I wanted to show you real quick. This is the camber belt we just removed. You can tell that it's got all these digits on here. This is what your alignment shop's going to use to set your camper properly. And this is what this side has as well. It's dirty, but it has the same as this side. This is the whole hole I was telling you about. You can do a little mark on the subframe there, or whatever you got to do. What I like to do is I will set a little marker in there, just give me a little dot, so once I reinstall it, I know where it needs to line up for me. Alright, so next we're going to remove the upper control arm here. These are 14 millimeter. Alright, so next thing we got to do is we're going to remove this inner and outer tie rod. First we got to remove this boot. Remove this clamp. Don't lose this clamp. We're going to reuse this. One thing we won't reuse is the clamp on that side. Should be a stainless steel type band. I'm just going to use some clips like this to hopefully clip it off. They're usually a pain in the ass to get off. So I can't really see what I'm doing, but I could feel around for it. And I was able to just kind of yank it off that way. Makes quick work of it. I'm going to go ahead and destroy this boot. We're not going to use it. We got a new one. But I wanted to kind of get access to this point here. This is what I was showing you at the beginning of the video. So basically we're replacing this guy here. And that's what you see here. It's really, really loose. This is fully worn, so it should not be able to do that. You can tell in this one, I can't, not by hand, I can't do it. So it kind of gives you a good idea. Anyway, going back to the beginning of the video, it's kind of saying my parameters. That comes with the measuring tape here. So I'm going to use this tape here. It's just an estimate. Is what I'm trying to get here. Or where the center point of this is. So I'm going to actually flip this around and use this portion as a center point here. So I get my measuring tape here, and this one says it's about 14 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down, 14 1/4. Alright, so now I know what to install our new tie rod in at. So I'm going to go ahead and just unscrew the end of it here. Alright, next thing we got to do is we got to get to this crush washer back here. It's basically this guy here, and when you reinstall it, it's going to be this way. But this washer is crushed in toward this nut or knuckle here, just to hold it in place. Alright, so now it's time to remove this. This is where this big ass tool comes into place here. It's got these little pieces. They're pretty cool. So once you put it in here like this, you can actually lock it in place like that, and you'll be ready to rock and roll. So basically this part here, and I believe I got the right size, it's 1 1/4, goes along this piece here. Just like so, and this guy goes over it. I'm going to lock it in place. I'm going to use that breaker bar that I said we need. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to do real quick is remove this caliper off the car. I'm going to crimp this brake hose with some vice grips. I don't recommend doing this if you're not replacing this hose, okay? So I'm replacing this hose, and so it doesn't matter to me. But I want to do it if you're not. That makes sense? Alright, so now it's finally time to install all the new parts here. I'm going to start with the upper control arm. Alright, so what you want to do with this is we want to keep this somewhat level with the ground, or kind of parallel with the ground, if you know what I mean. And we're going to set these two bolts to 44 foot-pounds. Alright, so the next step, we're going to do the lower control arms, okay? So this is two parts. This one here, we're going to call it, this one is going to go here. We'll call this number 1. And then the back one back here, we'll call this number 2. So this one gets a little bit tricky. I have to be honest with you a little bit. So we're going to kind of like, we'll install these very loosely. We're just going to get the bolts started basically. We're not going to torque anything down at this point until the very last step, or close to the last step. So I'm going to start with number 1. So I'm just going to leave it loose like this. No big deal. I'm going to grab number 2. I'm going to slide it up back over here to here. And we're going to start these bolts, and I'm going to put these bolts loose as well. Keep in mind, I'm not going to put nothing on them, no torque. I'm just going to tighten them out by hand first. One thing to note is to always buy quality parts when you're doing suspension like this. Make sure that you know you're getting it from a good place. I've seen issues where you can buy these and holes don't match up like they should, and so you end up modifying them or taking them back. So be careful with that. This portion is a little bit tricky. That's why everything's loose. These have very little tolerance, so you gotta make sure you're able to screw them in by hand first. You should be good there. So we'll come back to this once we tighten this all up, and I'll show you which Loctite we're going to be using and the torque. Alright, so before I get too far with the suspension here, just go ahead and install the inner tie rod. Remember, it's going to come with your new crush washer or locking washer. This goes this way like this. And keep in mind, once we torque this down, these things got the bend on here, okay? So we're going to have to come from behind, hit it with whatever you got, and make sure they bend on here. Now, I don't have a specific torque spec on this, so basically I'm going to put the tool that we use to remove it, and I'm going to put the pry bar on it and give it all I got, give it the beans basically, and make sure it locks in place. You gotta make sure this back washer does sit in those grooves back there. Matter of fact, let me show you real quick. So these guys right here are gonna fit in the groove. Let me see if we can see in the camera here. Sorry, the lower suspension's in the way, but right here there's some grooves, so this guy will actually lock right in here, just like so. So just make sure it sits in. Once you start screwing them in, you'll be able to feel for it and see when it gets into the right spot. Alright, I'm going to get it hand tight. We'll get the tool for the installer. I'm going to get it over here first. Okay. It's locked in place, and now I'm just going to get the pry bar and give it what I got. I think that should do it. Lock it. Alright, so once we got this all locked down in place here, it's time for the boot. I'm going to use these stainless steel, they're kind of like zip ties. They're a little bit easier to use, so you can actually get one started before you put it on. Just like a zip tie. I'm going to get a little bit of grease. I'm going to grease up these threads real quick. Put a little bit on the thread just to make it a little bit easier for this boot to slip on. So we'll make sure we get it over the back lip. There's a slight lip here in the back. I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I can push this the other way. Yeah, it's a little shiny piece here. So we're going to get the boot over that first. Alright, once you got the boot over there, you can get your metal band. Remember the little piece we saved when we took off the old boot? Slip over the front here. Alright, so now we're going to put the locking nut on real quick. I'm going to set this all the way back. You remember at the beginning we measured from center to end. Of course I already put the boot on, so I already screwed up, but I can feel through the boot and kind of get a good idea of where my measurement's at here. The whole idea anyway is to get it in the ballpark to being somewhat straight. So when you take it for alignment, you get there safely. So I got measured about 14 1/4, so I'll go ahead and start our tie rod in on here. And for now, we're going to keep it loose until we get the final assembly all together, and then we'll torque it down. When we torque these down anyway, it's only 40 foot-pounds. It's not too big of a torque number there, so just regular hand tools should help you get that set. Let me see if I can find a knuckle here. There we go. About 14 1/4. I got a little bit more to go. One full turn. Let's see what it gets me here. That's it. I'm good right there. So I'm going to go ahead and put my nut up to my tie rod in here, just so I can hold it in place. So we're in a pretty good ballpark. I mean, it's not going to be perfect. I never expected it to be perfect, so it's just to kind of make sure that we drive it, the car drives straight. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start torquing up all the lower suspension arms now. We can go ahead and torque this down. We can torque it to spec, but then once it gets to alignment shop, they're going to actually loosen this bolt up and adjust it anyway. So, but for safety's sake, we got to torque it to spec. Who knows how long it takes you to get to your alignment shop For me, it's not too bad. It's right down the street, so let's get that thing locked up. Alright, so we'll start with this one. It's a 19 millimeter and it's torqued to the 136 foot-pounds. Next is going to be these two here, and these are torqued to 180 foot-pounds, and they're going to require quite a bit of red Loctite. Alright, so we're gonna install this back bolt here. It's gonna be torqued down to 88 foot-pounds. On this one's here, I like to spread it all the way across the bolt. Make sure I got solid contact. And that should do suspension piece number 1 and number 2. These guys are set. Of course, don't remember to go back and bolting up your subframe brace here. Don't forget to do that. I'll do it off of camera after I got some other things to do underneath the car here, so I'm gonna leave them loose for now. Alright, so next is the lower ball joint. It sits right here. Newcastle nut. We're gonna torque this one down to 91 foot-pounds, I believe. Make sure I got this tight. I'm going to cheat a little bit and use the impact just to seat it up. I'm going to go ahead and get my torque wrench and torque it to 91 foot-pounds. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put in the shock bracket. I'm going to put the tie rod end link. This one might be a little bit tricky. Yeah, matter of fact, just keep this guy a little bit loose. There we go. We'll tighten her up after we get this thing fitted. There we go. Go ahead and get these things started here. There's not really a torque spec for these, just make sure they're really tight. I'm going to tighten this guy back down without busting the nut off. I'm going to go ahead and hit this with the impact to snug it up. Being careful not to kill it, of course. That's good enough. That should be good there. Like I said, you don't want to kill it, especially with the impact of that size. You'll end up destroying something. So I think we're all set here. I think we're ready for the rest of the assembly to go in. You can check your work at this point, but I think we're pretty good. Pretty good setup, and we're almost there. Alright, so now it's time for the steering knuckle. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to raise it up here. We have these dowels in here on the lower ball joint that we're going to set them in first. Like so. I'm going to go ahead and align it with the upper control arm. Just to kind of get it started here. I'm going to start the upper nut. Now the kit I came with, the lower control arm my kit came with, was it came with some new hardware, but it was kind of a downgrade from the stock. So here's the stock ones here. You can tell it's a higher grade, and so I'm going to use the stock bolts instead that go from underneath. So you're not going to be able to see. I apologize because, well, I can turn it a little bit, but you're not going to be able to see where I'm inserting in there, but they're going to be right down here at the bottom. And what I do is I'm going to use a little bit of blue Loctite on these bolts and torque them down to 83 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to give it a quick dab. It doesn't have to be a whole bunch on these. Alright, so the upper nut here, this one's only going to be 50 foot-pounds. Alright, so now we can slip in our new strut. Just before then, get everything lined up. And then we can slip it in from here in the back side. Align it with the holes first. Like so. We can slip it into a lower bracket. I know you can't see what I'm doing here in the lower bracket, but I'm just lining it up, the holes down here. Let me see if I can turn it so you can see this. Basically, I'm just lining it up down here on the bottom. There you go, that's a little bit better. I'm going to get our bolt, or this bolt down here. It only needs to be torqued down to 47 foot-pounds. Regular hand tools can do that. And then the top, you want to get one of the nuts started on top. Alright, so before I tighten everything up, I'm going to go ahead and install our brackets. Just install the speed sensor here. Make sure I put it in. Remember, you don't torque this one down really hard. I'm actually just going to use a small hand tool to snug it down. And of course this bracket here that goes onto our new strut. And I'm just going to snug that down with the regular hand tool as well. Alright, turn this over, making sure that everything is kind of loosey-goosey. Make sure nothing snags. And it looks like it's fine. I'm just worried about this wire here. Make sure everything's placed right, and it looks like it is. So we're good here. So the next thing is, we're going to move over to the tie rod end, get this thing snugged up, and after that we'll do brakes, and we should be good to go. This only gets torqued down to 40 foot-pounds. And we should be good there. Alright, so let's get to it and get this brake hardware on. I'm going to put the rotor on first. Get a couple lug nuts here just to hold it on for us. Alright, so we're going to get the caliper on, the caliper bracket on first. And install that into the steering knuckle. We got the 2 bolts that go onto this. You can put blue Loctite on these if you want. I'm not going to at this point. And then we're going to torque these down. We're going to torque it down to 87 foot-pounds. Alright, so we're good there. We're going to do the brake line last. Now it's time for the caliper. We're going to put the brake pads in. If you're curious what type of brake pads I use, it's from CarQuest here. See the part number? They're pretty good pads. So we're going to go ahead and pop these in there first. There we go. Of course, don't forget your little springs here. Help spread the pads so you don't have premature wear. You'd be surprised how many people forget to put these on, and then they have to change their brakes like a year later. So don't forget those. Now it's time for our caliper. I'm going to set it here real quick without damaging it. I'm going to put a little, like I said, without damaging it. And so I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the outside piston, just right up in here. Not too much. I'm just going to kind of skim it. Put some on there, and then I'll clean it up. There we go. Alright, so this one's ready to go right over the pads. Make sure that everything lines up. We'll start the lower bolt first if we can. upper. We're only going to torque these down to 25 foot-pounds. That should do it there. Now all we got left is that brake line. Alright, so I'm going to put on the new brake hardware here. I'm going to install this loosely first. Make sure I don't cross thread it, because that would suck. Okay. Alright, so these have copper washers, so I use around 25 foot-pounds just to set it and let it lock in. Should be enough to crush that washer. There we go, I can see it bulging. So we'll leave it there. Make sure you, if you do this, make sure you have a catch can or something on the floor to catch any fluid. So it's going to drip for a little while, which is okay. Gives me a chance to get some of that old stuff out. Of course, I'm going to have to bleed these brakes. I'm not going to show it in this video. If you want to see how I bleed them, go ahead and look at the video I have on the rear brakes. I'm going to do the same exact thing here up front. So this one here is a little bit tricky. You want a little bit of a curve like this. Alright, so that's pretty much going to wrap up all the work we're going to do down here. We just got to go on top inside the engine bay and tying down those strut bolts, and we're pretty much done here. We got to tighten up these three. For me, we have some other hardware that goes on here. Get all this stuff back on here. Anyway, that pretty much does it for this video. Hope this helps you out. If you have any questions on the procedure, I'm sure some of the video is not going to cover all of it, just because of length and all that good stuff. So if you have any questions, put them down below, and I'll make sure I answer them. Till the next time, thanks for joining me. Appreciate you guys watching.